Welcome to AllVoices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by AllVoices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Sean McMillan, Vice President of Human Resources at Captain D's. Thank you, Sean, so much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Rebecca. This is great.
Yeah, I'm excited because I know that we've had a chance to chat a little bit. We had a little bit of a chaotic start to this recording, which is, I think, very on brand for I guess like summer Fridays, right? But I'm excited to have you here because I think we're going to be talking about a topic that I've been wanting a guest to talk to me about for a while. So I'm really glad that you picked this scenario. Are you ready for it?
Yeah. Let's dive into the sticky stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So we're calling this the political yard sign. An employee posts a photo on his personal Instagram showing a political yard sign in front of his home. The sign supports a candidate whose platform includes positions some colleagues find deeply offensive. Several coworkers file complaints saying they feel unsafe working with him. The employee argues his off-duty political expression is protected by state law. His state has an explicit statute prohibiting employer retaliation for lawful off-duty political activity. HR must navigate the tension between the complainant's discomfort, the employee's legal rights, and a workplace culture that is now polarized around an external political event that HR has no authority over. So I should say, while these situations are technically fabricated, I feel like this is something that's going on and has been going on in a lot of workplaces over the years. What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a relevant topic, and I think it shows up at least every 4 years, but it shows up in between as well. And I think it's a relevant topic for now, for sure.
Yeah. And before we even dive into like so many of the different nuances of this particular scenario, if we kind of zoom out, what stands out to you as the most risky or the most unclear in the way that it's laid out currently?
I think it's laid out. I think the unclear part for me is how you would go about dealing with the employees that now feel unsafe. That's the sticky part, because the issue for me here are going to be the internal dynamics, the effect on, I think culture is shaped by the decisions that you make and how you show up when things like this happen. And so I think the larger thing is, and the unclear thing for me is the organizational dynamic, what standard you want to set here, and how you still show up for those employees that have the concern. And I think there's a leadership issue here too, with the person that put the yard sign in. So I think there organizationally is the unclear part for me right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by you think there's a leadership issue with the person who put the sign up?
I think it's avoidable if you put it on your social sites. That's okay. That's your social site. But I think if you know you're connected to employees, and my thought here is this is the one we probably, and I'm just injecting things into the scenario.
It's all fake. We can
probably don't.
Yeah, we can do whatever we want with it. It's all fake. So
right. So I think this is the one we probably know about. I think most people could probably get past seeing that. But it's the one that if you post it on your site and you know your team is on there, or people you work with are on there, I think you probably have had some sort of discussion around it at work. I think this is the one that may have caused them to have a concern for some way. It's not the first thing they've seen or the first thing they've heard. Mm-hmm. So I think there's probably, when I say there's a leadership issue, knowing when and how to express yourself, knowing when and how it's going to have an impact on others. You can do whatever you want in your personal time. I think that's pretty clear. But having that effect on others, knowing that what you do might adversely affect the organizational dynamic, especially if you're in charge of one, I think that's probably a larger lesson to learn here.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And also, how you express yourself and who you choose to connect with, like you mentioned. I mean, especially if it's, LinkedIn is one thing. More people are connected professionally on LinkedIn. I know people who also won't connect with employees on LinkedIn because, it's like sometimes you might be looking for a job and you don't want your employer to see that, right? There's so many different reasons.
Right,
But
right.
when it's your personal sites, your Instagram, your Facebook, I was always of the school of thought of just like, no, maybe when we don't work together anymore, we can be friends if it gets to that point. But until then, it's just like you're just giving people so much access to you.
It's a really good point. I think LinkedIn's about the only one that I'm not that I'm active on, that I'm not a passive
Yeah.
user in,
Yeah.
because for that very reason, I just don't want to. I think sometimes those lines can get blurred, or
Yeah.
things can be misconstrued, and you don't have the opportunity to clarify and those types of things. And all the reasons you just mentioned. So I think there's probably I think this is just avoidable
Yeah.
um, um, in many ways. I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that one of the first groups that you'd probably want to talk to are the groups or the employees who feel unsafe. So what kind of conversation do you have with them? I'm assuming it'll be individually, right? You're not going to gather them in a group and say, "Hey, let's all talk," right? But what do you talk to them about, and how do you kind of hear what they have to say while also balancing the neutrality that you kind of have to have in this type of position?
Yeah, it would be easier if we could all just have as most things HR are, if we could just have a sit down real quick, and we
Yeah.
didn't and talk about the issue, and we didn't have to document everything and
Yeah.
be worried about longer term consequences and that kind of thing. But yeah, I would certainly sit down. Presumably, there's a handful of people, one or two or three, that probably made the concern and that represent everybody else, that the employees don't feel safe. And I think you go to those people and you do exactly what you said. You find out why. You find out why this particular incident. You find out if there's background, if there's history, if this is just the one thing that you couldn't take anymore, or this is the very first thing. Because I think that leads you to how you talk to the person that posted it.
Mhm.
If these employees are, they have a right to be heard. It's not that,
Yeah.
as far as I know, I don't think there's any. This crosses some duty of care line here
Yeah.
for a safety concern. But it doesn't mean it should be dismissed. It shouldn't. It's a legit employee concern, and those folks have to find a way to work together after this. And you don't want to shut that down. So you treat this like any other concern, and you talk to them, and you find out the history, and you find out what's exactly concerning them and what not safe means, and you dive in and clarify the concern a little bit.
Yeah. I love that you're saying, you're looking for different context too. You're looking to see, is this the first time that they're feeling unsafe around this person? If so, is it because of what they posted? Is it something else? If there's a pattern of people feeling unsafe, then that's not about the yard sign, right? It's about the other things that the yard sign's just a data point. Um, I think that's the thing that, when you're looking at employee relations and investigations, like a lot of people want to be able to say, I made this complaint to HR, they did something about it. But most of the times it's like, it's a lot is, not most of the times, but you do get employees that'll sort of say something like this where they're like, I feel unsafe. But it's like, if there's no pattern and if there isn't something that is actually happening, there's nothing that HR can really do about it because there's nothing to do, and that's the part that I think gets HR vilified a little bit.
Yeah, and there comes to that conversation includes a lot too.
Yeah.
So it's what does not feel safe mean?
Hmm.
What is, what do you want to see happen here? How can, we get past this in your brain? How is this solved? Those types of things. And I think it's about hearing people out, because it takes a lot to call somebody, especially if this is your supervisor or whatever.
Yeah.
It takes a lot for people to call, and they have to be reassured that that's okay, because it is, and it might not be the resolution you want, but at least we got to talk it out. And I got to explain to you what the laws and regulations are and what company policy is and those types of things. The feeling heard matters a lot here.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. And that's my first instinct, that this is probably not the first thing So we need to find that out, because it matters how we get to resolution with the person with the sign as well.
Yeah. And so what are you doing to find that out? I mean, you know, there could be documentation. Are you having other conversations with other people too?
Well, I mean, as is normally the case, you're talking to somebody in these, and if they give you an example, it involves somebody else, or they heard something else, and so you have to find which one of those is credible, what those instances mean. And I would certainly talk to these folks before I would talk to the person that put the sign in the yard. So I had some background first.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, if they give you something else, if it's just this, then you talk this thing out.
Yeah.
If it's not, if there's history here, or if there are other examples or other people or other things you should know, which should be one of the questions you ask when you're talking to somebody
Yeah.
about a concern, then you decide how deep you need to go, which ones of those are credible.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant too, is just, you know, you kind of have to sort of see where there's like patterns, but also just kind of do it through these types of conversations, because this is kind of where things can get kind of lost. Not everything is black and white, right? In HR, most things are rarely black and white. And I think there's like this layer to this that's also sort of the external pressure, or the perceived external pressure from the culture side, from the organizational side, right? Because it's like, you know, employees have more of a voice now than they ever have before, which is great, both internally and externally. Social media is a thing. Employees can go out there and they can tell any story that they want. But like, do you think that there's a risk of employees posting things about this particular person that could reflect poorly on the company, that could put someone in danger? Like, you know, how do you see that type of risk, and how do you contain that if you do see it?
Well, yeah, I think we sort of skipped right over that part, right? Because it says in there specifically there's a law.
Yeah.
But you're going to have your own internal social media policy.
Yeah.
So the social media policy, you know, it matters if they're wearing a company shirt next to the sign. If they're, then that's a different conversation, right? And so or they have something company related right next to that. And then conversely, your folks that you're talking to that are concerned about their safety, you know, should they feel a need to send a rebuttal to that post or something, and then you're into social media policy land, where you know, most of those say that what you do within the within the restaurant with other employees applies online with other employees, so on and so forth. So yes, you would have to certainly go through your policies. We sort of skipped right over that because it outlined that state law. But there's a cultural piece that, again, I think how you handle these situations tells everybody, gives HR a validity, helps shape the culture. It's how you decide what to do in these situations. It's not just the black and white piece that you mentioned. If it was, that'd be pretty simple. But it's the long-term effects. And I think the attorneys, what I learned in school, I'm not an attorney, but one of the legal premises I learned in school was that IRAC model that the attorneys use, right? Which is issue, rule, application, conclusion, and where that's normally applied to some sort of law or regulation. And did this issue affect, did the application affect this issue? Is there a law that applies to that? And did they break some sort of rule in doing that? I always used that model for the black and white pieces of an investigation. So I sort of adopted it for investigatory pieces and said, what's our policies then? What's the issue? What's the rule that we have in place? What's the policy we have that guides us through this? What's the application of both of those to this particular issue? And then, you know, the facts around it to this particular issue. And then we come to a conclusion. And if that were it, and they weren't people and emotions and organizational dynamics and cultural considerations, that'd be super simple. But it's always the other stuff, right? that gets you into the land where you have to navigate something past just the black and white.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard of the IRAC framework. That's like super helpful. And I think just a really good takeaway for anybody listening to this too. Cause, it's just like, and you said it was, it's something that it makes a lot of sense because the application part of it is a lot of where the work is, right? Because that's what kind of the context of the issue, the everything around the issue, which I know is the context, it impacts how the policy might be applied, and what the ultimate conclusion might be.
Right.
And, I see when I kind of like step back from this type of scenario too, the thing that can be really hard with any of these scenarios, but especially something like this, is like, I always like to remind people that the HR person who's kind of caught in the middle of this also probably has their own reaction to either side of this, right? Yeah. So like, we're all trying to just be as neutral as possible to help everybody kind of get where they need to go. Right. That sometimes is its own feat of strength, especially depending on what the issue is, right? Yeah. But I think this kind of like, we see things where people say that there shouldn't be politics at work. And, but then we also see arguments to bring your whole self to work and authenticity at work. Right. My stance in general is bring your best self to work, whatever self that might be. But also work is politics, work is political, we're governed by employment law. There's, all these different kinds of things. And so that's why it's never as simple as keep politics out of work. And so it's always curious to see sort of how some of those policies are written, especially, how you're maybe expressing your politics, how it might apply. And that's where the application part is just so interesting to me. Yeah, we talk about law all the time. I mean, we're in employee relations. We're talking about the law all the time.
The laws and regulations govern what we do on a daily basis, right? Yeah. And you can't separate yourself from that. And every time there's a new administration or something that affects your, macroeconomic forces or your particular, discipline within an organization, HR especially, because it's governed by all that. You're right. You can't avoid it politically, but you can set up some guardrails and guidelines and things that that just aren't appropriate.
Yeah, I think something that you said earlier that I want to come back to is you were saying that you were going to talk to the people who felt unsafe and ask them, what do they want out of this, or what do they want done? Yeah. So what do you do when they say, we want this person fired? How do you respond to that?
Well, I think to me, it's a critical part of any conversation that you have in an investigation. You should ask the employee what they want. It's your chance to let them to open that dialogue, because if they want something you can't give, let's talk about it now.
Yeah.
If they want something that and let's talk about why. And I think the framing I normally use is, listen, I'll be perfectly straight with you. I want you to do the same with me. And I'll tell you exactly. And it might not be what you want to hear, but at least we have a guideline that we're straight with one another. Can we do that?
Yeah.
And then when I ask you what you want and I'm not able to give that, it's better to address it now than to have a secondary issue or a lingering issue or something that at least somebody can come to terms with and make a decision internally about how they need to deal with that. But I think it's better just to get it all out there. I'll tell you what's going on. And if I can't tell you something that's internal, I'll tell you that I can't tell you.
Yeah.
But at least we can have that dialogue. And I think we owe people that transparency. If we're going to ask them to have it with us, then we owe that back. And so I always ask that question, what do you want to see from this? Because if they give me something and I'll be like, I might be like, I don't think that's going to happen. I'll be honest with you. And here's why.
Yeah.
Here's what we can do.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of in between that gets rid of an us and them and gets us all thinking solution based rather than side based, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. Yeah. I love that, because that's where this is sort of one of those moments where in my mind, when I look at this scenario, that's the moment where HR can really shine, is the place where you sort of say, you can have that open dialogue. ask people for what they want, what outcome they want, because like you said, it's good to just like, hey, let's get that out early. Let's just talk about that. And that's a space for HR to also explain what's actually happening in the context of the workplace. Like, it's like there are laws that protect people. There are policies that we have that apply or don't apply, whatever that might be. But also like, this is my role and my job in this. And let me explain to you how this is going to go. Let me explain to you how we're going to go through this process, how we're going to address your feeling of being unsafe. We might not get to the conclusion that you want, or we might not get to the end result that you want, for all of these different reasons. I think there's like, sometimes there's a lot of, maybe I'm just on a weird side of LinkedIn, but I see a lot of complaints about HR where, it's like the message is sort of just, it's like, oh, they say all these corporate speak things, or, they're putting, you can tell that this went through several different iterations of approval before it's like shared with people. And I just think that there is more craving lately for people to just kind of hear things in a straightforward way. Yeah. Obviously still balanced, still, the way that, but they just don't want to hear sort of a whole roundabout political or corporately political response to things. And this is kind of like, again, one of those moments where I think that HR can really shine and just sort of say, look, like, I might have my own set of feelings about this. That's not relevant to this situation at all. So we're here to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and consistently and to the letter of the law. And that's what the job here is, right?
Right. When confronted with information, even though they might not like it, most people are reasonable folks and go, well, then I either have a decision to make, or at least he heard me out. But when you start a conversation and you continue it, and you generally start it from the point of, listen, we're two folks who work for the same company, and there's an issue going on right now, and I'm here to help you figure it out. Yeah. When you start that way, instead of I'm HR and I'm here to recite a policy to you. Yeah. Well, they can look that up. Then what are you there for? Yeah. You're there for that very reason, to solve the issue. And we're just two people who work at the same place, who are dealing with an issue. Talk to me and let's figure this thing out. Yeah. And I also think it's a learning opportunity for us when we ask somebody, what is it that you want to see? And we don't have a good answer for that. Then we need to go back and look about why we don't have a good answer for that. Yeah. If they want something we can't give, but we kind of feel like we should, or there's a hole here. Yeah. That's our opportunity to go back and say, okay, we might need to look organizationally about how we handle this, or send out a guideline, or update a policy, or do something. It's our chance to learn from the folks that are telling us they have a problem, about problems we might need to deal with. So it's not just handling an issue with them. It's our opportunity to learn how we have this going forward, how we deal with it going forward, or how we might need to change something in the organization. Yeah, this is so true. I feel like there's like any policy that you have needs to be stress tested in situations like this, right? Sure. Your social media policy, whatever it might be, it's like, okay, this is our moment to take it out, see, does it work in the moments that we need it to? If so, great. If not, what do we need to change? How do we need to change it? And how can we use this feedback to change, if not a policy, then at least a communication, right? Because that's kind of the whole thing. It can be tempting to sort of think of certain things as set it and forget it, but we're doing a disservice to people if we're not constantly ready to iterate on the surrounding elements of our job that support the employees. That's the whole point. And I think, just like you acknowledged to the individual that there's a situation here that we have to deal with, and it might not be the right thing, periodically, I think you should do that organizationally. You can't bury your head in the sand and pretend this isn't an election year, whatever it is. You send something out that says, listen, I know there's a heated political environment. We get it. We all have a part in this. We're all humans. We're all have lives outside of here. As a reminder.
This is where we're at.
Right? Just this is where we're at. And we're all human. I think people respond to that, appreciate that. Know the guidelines. You avoid stuff like this. And if you didn't have it before, maybe that's one of the things you learn now. That maybe you get out in front of this and acknowledge the space we're in collectively as humans.
So true. And the collective space that we are as humans is, I think, the sort of point that I want to bring a lot of this back to too in this, where, you have employees that are expressing that they feel unsafe because this person posted this, but you may also be making this employee feel unsafe now because now they're, whether right, wrong, or indifferent, right? But it goes both ways. And, that's not, I think this is where company culture and company values can really also come in handy, because there can be those sort of grounding principles that are like, hey, when we're here, this is how we interact with each other. These are the expectations that we have of each other. So if you're trying to figure out how to navigate next steps with this person where, maybe there's some friction that's happening between you guys, then let's talk about how we can leverage our own company values to help us figure out how to kind of get through this. Because that's what they're for. I think this is sort of one of those conversations where we realize that we put a lot of tools in place as HR leaders, and that these are the kinds of situations where you need to kind of like throw everything at it, but in a very specific way.
For sure. And I think that person, to your point, it might be developmental for this person who put it in the sign. I didn't realize the impact.
Yeah.
Your first reaction might be, dude, what do you think?
Yeah.
Internally, but it comes out with, listen, I want to have a conversation with you about that. So I want to make you aware of the impact that it had.
Yeah.
And I know that likely wasn't your intent, and you're showing support, and that's your right. And that's what you do. I do want to remind you of social media policy here, but I don't see that you broke that. Yeah. But I do want to talk to you about, assuming, I think the scenario said this was the manager or something, right?
It just says employee, and that his coworkers, that their coworkers felt unsafe. Right. Yeah.
So then it's intent versus impact conversation, right? Yeah. Those are a little more impactful with leaders, but the same thing with this person. I don't think you meant it that way, but listen, you're part of a team, and not everybody's going to agree with you. And let's think about, if this was a disagreement at work, how you would handle it. Yeah. And it's one of those sidebar conversations that can't really be a sidebar conversation.
Yeah.
Because you have to, because you're doing an investigation, you have to document, and you have to cross all your T's, and you have to, in my mind, go through the IRAC model and look at the policies and see what was violated. But at the end of the day, if this person didn't violate anything, but their actions were still disruptive to the business somehow, you have to let that person know that this was the impact, regardless of whether you meant it or not. Yeah. And going forward, let's be less disruptive to the business if there's a way to do that.
Yeah.
Now, these employees can just unfollow the person. That's that simple too.
Yeah.
It might be part of the conversation with them, or he might, unfriend them or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't, it could be as simple as that. Yeah. But I think, to your point, that it's developmental, and to the extent that you acknowledge that listen, you didn't step on any laws or policy violations, but it still impacted the business.
Yeah.
And here's how, and we can't have that either.
Yeah.
So let's work through this piece and what sounds right to you going forward.
Yeah.
And I think even with that person saying, this is what sounds right to us going forward, does this sound right to you going forward? At least we're then getting some sort of consensus about what needs to happen should continuous disruption occur.
Yeah. It's so true. The consensus and the being able to walk away saying we talked this through. No one was dismissed. Everyone had a chance to speak their piece and say their part. And now we've agreed on sort of a go forward state together in an ideal world, right? And then now we know, if we do see another instance like this again, we now have precedent, or at least we have additional context that we could say, hey, the last time this happened, this is what we did. Even if it's with a different group of people, it's like, well, we now have sort of a blueprint that we can use. I think that's kind of the key with a lot of these types of situations is if this is the first time something like this is happening at your company, how you apply the policy or how you navigate it is setting the standard for how you have to navigate them moving forward too, which is why slowing down, being thoughtful is so important, because whatever you decide on has to be something that you can say, yes, this is how we're going to look at this until this no longer works, and then we'll have real reason to change it. That's right.
And it might feel to folks that this is not an answer to the issue, but sometimes, as you mentioned before, sometimes there's not. There's not. It makes it so much easier for everybody if it's this thing was wrong or this person was wrong and these were the consequences. And that linear thought in your mind is how it goes. But it's not how it works out with folks. If folks worked in boxes and folks worked linear and folks worked in this or that, but they don't. Yeah. And they all have different. They all don't think. We all don't think the same. Yep. And we all don't agree on the same things. Yeah. And so sometimes there's not a checkbox answer here. Sometimes it's just, this is how we're going to apply this going forward. And this is how we dealt with this situation to the best we could. Yeah. Yep. So true. So true. Well, if you believe it or not, we're actually out of time. So I only have one more question for you before we let everybody go. What like when you think about, shifting it a little bit to sort of HR as a practice in general, what do you think is a common assumption about HR that needs to be challenged? What about HR? What about HR needs to be challenged? Or what assumption about HR? So if you're one of these, if you're an employee and you're just like, oh, HR's just there for the company, they're not there for us, or, HR makes all the decisions and they block everything that my manager wants to do. Like those are some others that I've gotten. Yeah. You hit the highlight reel there. I think it's that HR is there to solely for the purpose of protecting the organization. Mm-hmm. And I see that a lot. And I think anybody who's in HR knows that those conversations you have on the back end to protect people as well, that put people first, those unseen conversations would change their mind. I don't, that is oftentimes, I think it's from the perspective of somebody who had a concern or a bad experience with HR, or something didn't go their way, or maybe they ran into just a bad HR person who didn't know how to handle the issue they wanted. Yeah. I don't know, but I think it's shaped by something that wasn't supportive HR. Yeah. And yes, that's part of it. Yes, you're there to protect the organization, but you're there to adhere to laws that protect the organization, regulations that are there to protect the organization. But you're also governed by ones that protect the employee. And I think it's missed on folks that have that claim that the whole reason that culture, that employee relations, that engagement, that rewards, that those things are a focus, recognition that those things are a focus is precisely not to keep the company out of trouble. It's precisely to provide you with a good employee experience. And I think that's half our job, if not more. So, and I believe it should be. Yeah. And so I think that's an assumption usually based on a specific interaction. And so we, go from the specific to the general. It must be like this everywhere. And I don't think it is. And I'm sorry that some instance may have affected somebody's opinion there. But I think that's another one from the highlight reel. But I think that's a legit one that I see all the time. It's a very real one. It's the constant battle. And you call that the unseen work that HR does. It's like, yes. It's like, do you know how many times the managers come to me and said, I want to fire this person? And I say, you can't. And here's why. Like, you don't see that. You just wake up with a job the next day. Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Agreed. Well, Sean, thank you so much for being here. This was so fun. And I know that, I feel like I could talk to you for a long time just about all this kind of stuff too, because I could nerd out over HR. So yeah. This was great. Thank you so much for having me. And what a wonderful podcast where you get to throw out ideas like this in situations that people get to learn from. This is such a great idea, and you were so easy to talk to. So thank you so much. Thank you. So are you. And thank everybody for listening. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Bye.